A week after Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara LICH was denied bail, Pat King, another person arrested in Ottawa during the protests last February, was finally given bail after spending 150 days in jail. To discuss this more in detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, what's the difference between these two cases?
Well, if you remember, Tamara Leach was granted bail and then was hauled back to Ottawa, hauled back to Ottawa because she breached the bail conditions right here in Toronto. And they said, all right, you were given bail, you were given conditions, you didn't follow them, you're going back to jail. You and I might consider it a minor infraction, what she was accused of doing, but it was still an infraction. And when you're granted bail, as Pat King just was, you're told, okay, here are the conditions. And if you don't agree to those conditions, you don't get bail, by the way. They are fully imposed upon you. The court will say, you will be granted bail, you will be granted your limited freedom under these conditions. Do you agree? If you say yes, you're expected to uphold them. And as we've talked about before, there are so many examples of people charged multiple times, convicted previously of serious gun crimes, still given bail. So you can make the argument that Tamara Leach is being made an example of. Either way, she did breach her conditions. Pat King was denied bail several times prior to being given bail yesterday. 150 days behind bars when he's not actually charged with violent crimes is quite surprising. He's charged with mischief, counseling mischief. He is also charged with multiple counts of perjury as part of all of this. But those aren't normally the types of things that would keep you behind bars. So granted bail, told to leave Ottawa forthwith. I believe he had 24 hours to get out of town. He's got to stay with his surety in Alberta, no contact with organizers of the Freedom Convoy, and no social media use.
Brian, there's lots of chatter that we may be headed toward an early federal election. What are you hearing right now?
Well, I'm hearing lots of liberals saying no publicly, but the fact is that this is chatter that's been going on for several weeks, and it wasn't started by me. I'm getting blamed for it on social media. It's just Lilley and these conservatives are coming up with this idea. No, look, this started over the last several weeks. Many stories about this, including one in the Hill Times, which is a newspaper that just covers Parliament Hill, not even really read off Parliament Hill, but they quoted anonymous Liberal MPs saying that, yeah, they're in their ridings, they're fundraising, they're organizing, they're preparing because they think that if Justin Trudeau sees an opportunity, that he might take it for an early fall election. I've heard about dates in November being discussed. That would put the election after Ontario's municipal vote, which is October 24th. It would put it after Quebec's provincial election, and sometime in the middle of November, probably around the 14th after Remembrance Day or the week after. So why would they be going? Well, because they can. I mean, that's essentially why they will. If they see winning conditions, then Trudeau will consider pulling the plug. I know he's got the deal with the NDP, but Jagmeet Singh's making noises that he's not happy with the way the Trudeau government is handling the situation with inflation and a whole lot of other issues. You've got the Conservatives ready to pick a new leader on September 10th. Well, if you call a snap election before they've got a chance to appoint staff to get their bearings, I don't care how good a campaigner you are, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So whether it's Pierre Poilievre, who's the perceived frontrunner, or it's Jean Charest, who's a bit of the long shot, neither one of those men would be able to restructure the party with their own staff, be on election footing, and be ready to go the way they would want to be in such a short period of time. So Justin Trudeau's got the advantage of an NDP that's completely hapless, Conservatives who would not be as prepared as they want to be. You're going to have, economic storm clouds coming. We've got the inflation numbers coming out tomorrow. It's expected to be at another record. There are predictions of a recession in 2023, so we'd want to get out ahead of the bad economic news. And then finally, COVID. If COVID numbers are going up in the fall, Justin Trudeau might want to juxtapose himself against Pierre Poilievre. Poilievre, assuming he wins, he's been saying he's against mandates, he's against restrictions, give freedom back. Trudeau will try and paint him as anti-vax, as a COVID denier, and that he's the one to keep Canadians safe. We know that Canadians are divided. Just a new Angus Reid poll out showing how very divided we are on whether we're concerned, and it's generational. And older Canadians are more concerned about COVID than younger Canadians. Older Canadians tend to vote conservative. So all these things going into the mix, Al, and being discussed, being pondered, being thought about, because Justin Trudeau still wants to show that he can win. And I think he definitely wants a shot to try and beat Pierre Poilievre.
Now, here's something I want to run by you. I was speaking to some other political pundits, and they were saying the reason why Justin Trudeau got this bizarre haircut, now we're going to talk about this in just a moment here, is because he wants to potentially lose the next election. Then the Liberals will retool, bring in maybe somebody like Francois Philippe Champagne as the new leader, have the Conservatives take over when there's a recession, as you mentioned, maybe heighten COVID numbers, and then come back bigger and stronger than ever and win a majority. That they're purposely trying to potentially lose the next election. What are your thoughts in that regard?
I haven't heard that, and I'm not sure I buy it. I think Francois Philippe Champagne, Frankie Bubbles, as I call him, is a real contender to replace Trudeau. But that's too Machiavellian, what you just described. The trying to lose on purpose so that you can come back later. No political party, especially the Liberals, ever wants to give up power. They want to hang on to it forever and just pass the baton down, pass the torch from one leader to the next. So I think Trudeau's haircut. I agree with some people I've heard from who say, well, maybe it's a sign he's trying to put a fresh face on a almost 8-year-old government and try and put that fresh face on before going to the polls. But I'm not sure I buy what you put forward. Interesting, though.
Now, Patrick Brown has not only been kicked out of the Conservative leadership race, Brian, he has essentially withdrawn as he's announced he'll be running to become the mayor of Brampton once again. Does this really change anything in regards to the CPC leadership race at all? Is it still Pierre Poilievre's to lose?
It is. And, we're going to have to wait until September 10th to find out if he does lose it. The Charest camp is still saying that they are in this to win it and that they can. I'm not sure how that plays out because there's a lot of unknowns with Brown. I think Brown dropping out does change a lot of things. It potentially could put Pierre Poilievre on track for a first ballot victory. They wanted that. Nobody in the Poilievre camp was willing to say they were going to get it. They knew they were close. 46% of all memberships they claim they sold. So if all of those people showed up, well, that's close, but it's not quite 50% plus one. If Brown is out, if a lot of his people just don't vote, well, then that helps Poilievre win on a first ballot potentially. Alternatively, there was a lot of discussion that Jean Charest wouldn't finish second. And so all this talk about Charest will take Brown's second ballot. Well, if you're finishing third or fourth, you're not getting anybody's second ballot because you're dropping off. Well, now, the other unknown is, do all those Brown supporters make Charest their first choice? And is there enough for him to stick around, be second, get the other down ballot support, and potentially drag this out or even potentially win? There's just too many unknowns that come about with this because we don't know where those 150,000 plus memberships that Brown sold are going to go. How many vote? How many vote for Poilievre? How many vote for Charest? How many vote for one of the other three? We don't know.
Yeah, let's talk about one of the other three for just a moment here. In Leslyn Lewis, we had her on our program on Bridge City News, an intelligent woman putting forward a solid platform. She's well loved across Canada. What are your thoughts? Could she maybe surprise some people and win the leadership?
No, I don't think there's a chance this time. She came closer than anybody thought last time. But I had predicted, from talking to people across the country, that she was going to win certain provinces, including winning Saskatchewan on the first ballot, which she did. She took all the Western provinces on the second ballot, I believe. And so she was very impressive, but a lot of the excitement around her has been scooped up by Pierre Poilievre and his campaign, which has been dynamic. It has been great at communicating and delivering a message. So I think a lot of the people that backed Lewis last time are backing Pierre this time. So that leaves her more with just a core. If you remember back to last leadership, Hal, Lewis was initially just dismissed as, well, she's just a SOCON, she's just there for the pro-life votes. And she went well beyond that. She got people who aren't associated with that faction of the party at all voting for her. This time, I think she might be closer to being reduced to that faction of the party because of the support for Poilievre being so strong.
Brian, the Trudeau Liberals released a new discussion paper on reducing emissions, but this time for the oil and gas sector. And your colleague, Lorne Gunter, calls it a real slap in the face to us here in the West. What are your thoughts?
I think Lauren's absolutely right, and he wrote a great column in this in the Sun, and I encourage everyone to read it because he details that they're asking the oil and gas sector to reduce their emissions by 42% by 2030.
Wow.
Their emissions in creating oil and gas. The transportation sector, which is causes almost as much in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, they're only asking for it to reduce their emissions by 23%. Well, why the difference? If all emissions are equally bad, as Lauren says, why the difference? This is just like the fertilizer push. Look, the fertilizer push that we discussed before, which is again about reducing fertilizer use to reduce nitrous oxide, because that's another greenhouse gas. They want to reduce that. Farmers say there's no way to effectively reduce nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer without reducing fertilizer use. That's going to hit across the country, but it will be concentrated in the West. And much like this, there are oil and gas plays elsewhere, but it's concentrated, heavily concentrated in the West. And so this is going to hurt Alberta and Saskatchewan more than any other places in the country. Guess what? The Trudeau Liberals don't win in very many seats in those places. So do they care about them? No. And the bureaucrats in Ottawa, you've lived in Ottawa, worked there. I've lived in Ottawa and worked there. You know, that's a place that you fly over on your way to Vancouver if you're an Ottawa bureaucrat. It's not a place that most people think about in any glowing terms. So it is a sad reality. And it's, you know, why I was glad to see at one of the recent leadership debates talk about Western alienation and Western separation. It's something I worry about a great deal. And these types of policies, these types of discussion papers, either on reducing oil and gas emissions or the fertilizer emissions discussion paper, they don't help the situation at all.
Very true, Brian. We only have a couple of moments left here. I wanted to chat with you about Stats Canada set to release their latest inflation figures for June. May's rate, 7.7%. Brian, that took us back to the 80s with such a huge cost of living increase. Is anyone expecting relief in these latest numbers?
No, in fact, discussions of whether, you know, where it will land between 8 and 10%, which would take us back to even earlier in the 80s. It would take us back to the recession of the early 1980s. These are not good numbers by anyone's estimation. And yes, I know that there are global factors at play in here. The war in Ukraine is a factor. Supply chain issues are a factor. COVID zero policies in China are a factor. How we're recovering from the pandemic. These are all factors. But time and again, economists, banks, you know, financial experts will say the Trudeau government spending is part of it. They need to slow that down so that all the pressure isn't on the Bank of Canada, which in turn puts the pressure on you, the homeowner, with a mortgage or a line of credit. The Trudeau government's unwilling to do that. They've been dismissive of this, and it's really too bad because they need to do something so that it's not just all on a small group of people bearing the brunt of this. And we could be headed for a recession, according to Royal Bank and some warnings from the Bank of Canada.
Brian, the random testing resumed at airports once again today. How is this working, and why is the government persisting so much?
I think that a big part of the reason the government's persisting is due to political science, not medical science. As I discussed earlier, you know, Justin Trudeau would love to juxtapose his position on COVID-19 to Pierre Poilievre's. He plays to that group of people who are convinced we always need more restrictions and we'll need them forever. No infectious disease specialist that I've spoken to believes that this is actually going to help. There are times when it could, especially with new variants coming in, or if we didn't have vaccines. We've got vaccines, and it is helping keep people out of hospital. It is helping stop people from dying when they do go to hospital. This idea that we need to continue with policies that might have made sense in March 2020 or December 2020 before all of this took place, no, it doesn't make sense. But the only good part is the testing is happening offsite, so it's not adding to delays at the airports, which continue. Not just Pearson, but Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary as well. All of them. I spoke to somebody who went through for Stampede, and it wasn't just volume that was causing the delays. An awful lot of issues at Canada's airports.
Absolutely. Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.